Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on when you're watching this. So, very happy today to be presenting a case study on the Refugio incident, which occurred in California in 2015. I'm Mike Ziccardi. I'm the director of the Oiled Wildlife Care Network based at UC Davis School of Veterinary Medicine. And I'm joined with Sarah Wilkin. Sarah, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Sarah Wilkin. I'm with the NOAA Fisheries Office of Protected Resources, and I'm the coordinator of the Marine Mammal Health and Stranding Response Program.
So let's get to it. Case study, kind of an archaeological dig, thinking back several years on this response. So first and foremost, Santa Barbara, California. For those of you who aren't aware of it, bottom right-hand corner here, it has a long history of oil production within the U.S. And we'll be getting into that in a bit. In fact, it also has a long history of issues related to oil production, harkening back to the Platform A blowout in 1969, which was the third largest oil spill in U.S. waters, followed by Deepwater Horizon and the Exxon Valdez oil spills. It also was the birthplace of the environmental movement for the U.S., stemming specifically from that Platform A blowout. The US EPA was formed, that and Earth Day in 1970. Both of those followed Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, which was published in 1962, but also the Platform A oil spill in 1969. It also was the impetus for revising and what ended up becoming the Clean Water Act in 1972, which really instituted increased protection for U.S. waters. And the Oil Pollution Act of 1990, following the Exxon Valdez oil spill, was actually a revision of that initial Clean Water Act from 72. So all of those things have its history right in this region that we're going to be talking about today. So Santa Barbara was also the location of the first offshore drilling. Back in 1896 in Summerland, California, was actually the first offshore well that was there. And since that time, there's been a long history of offshore drilling in that region. In fact, the world's longest extended reach well was drilled in that area from existing offshore fixed platform drilling rigs. So actually drilled 9.7 kilometers horizontally and 2,000 meters below sea level. So again, long history in this region. Specifically, what we're going to be talking about today is an incident that occurred within what is known as the Santa Ynez unit. And so that's platforms Heritage, Hondo, and Harmony. At that time, they produced about 150,000 barrels per day, or 6.3 million gallons. And the pipeline that actually transported that oil was owned by Plains All American Pipeline. So here's an extended map of this area. You can see all of the platforms that were in place at the time of this incident. And the ExxonMobil Las Flores Canyon area is the actual line we're going to be talking about today. So the Refugio oil spill, we'll give some basic information on it. It occurred in May 19th, 2015 at about 11 o'clock in the morning. Line 901 was the line itself that ruptured. That line is a 10-mile long pipeline buried 24 inches beneath the surface and was built in 1987. It actually ran from the Las Flores area down to Gaviota. So at the time of the accident, there was actually 54,000 gallons per hour actually running through that pipeline. What we saw during that time was that this spill occurred due to external corrosion. In fact, there was a federal report published in February of 2017, which showed that the failure was due to a 5.5 by 5.5 inch gash, a failure of corrosion in that pipeline. What they found was the corrosion had a maximum depth of about 86% in that area. They also found in that report that line 901 operated for 35 minutes after the leak occurred. Now that line had been inspected by planes in May, but that inspection did not accurately actually size the amount of external corrosion in the area. And it did not prevent external corrosion of the pipe under the insulation. So as you can see from these from these images, we actually see the flap itself and the tear. One of the other challenges with this spill is that the pipeline leak occurred here inland, then it ran through drainage culvert openings under the freeway 101, and then actually out into the ocean here. So what we had was both an inland incident as well as a marine incident. So initial reports for this spill reported about 100,000 gallons spilled, of which 21,000 gallons actually made it into the channel itself, Santa Barbara Channel, into the marine waters. Later, that was actually revised upwards to about 143,000 gallons, but now it's thought to be about 124,000 gallons that was released into that area. So as you can see, this incident right from the start was a challenge as far as developing our standardized response itself. A unified command was quickly established, but one of the challenges, because it started as an inland spill and moved to a marine spill, US EPA was initially the federal agency that took the lead, but it quickly moved over to the Coast Guard. The California Department of Fish and Wildlife Office of Spill Prevention and Response, or OSPR, was involved. Plains was involved as well. And then the local Santa Barbara County were all involved within the Unified Command. There were also two indigenous clans, Native American groups involved as well, the Chumash and the Owl clans that were there. Cleanup was quickly initiated. A wildlife branch was established under operations. In my program, the Oil Wildlife Care Network, was activated. Now, the OWCN, if you're not familiar with it, is a program through California with its mission to provide the best achievable capture and care to oil-affected animals anywhere in the state, California. The administration of our program, we do have signed memorandums of understanding with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and NOAA National Marine Fisheries Service to allow all of our programs to operate seamlessly during spill response under a collective wildlife branch. CDFG OSPR actually operated the Oil Wildlife Care Network up until 1997, after which it came over to the Wildlife Health Center at UC Davis, and since that time we've operated the program. We have what we call our 4 R's within the OWCN. Readiness, so intensive preparedness for spill response. Reaching out, sharing the knowledge that we have. Research, conducting projects and funding research to better understand how oil affects wildlife, and then active spill response. Today, we currently have 44 member organizations that are part of the OWCN throughout the state. We have 12 what we call primary care facilities. Those are facilities that can actually take an oiled animal in, clean it, rehabilitate it, and release it back into the clean environment. But we also have 15 stabilization facilities that can take an oiled animal in, provide it its initial first aid, and then move it on to primary care centers. And we have more than 1,600 people in our database that we can activate at a moment's notice to be able to get out there and start caring for animals should a spill occur anywhere in the state. Now, for this incident itself, we do have a large number of organizations in the greater Santa Barbara area. We're going to touch on these as we progress through the case study.
All right, I'm going to take over and give a little bit of an overview. So this is a typical incident command structure for an oil spill. So at the top, you have your triangle, your unified command with the federal on-scene coordinator. And as Mike talked about, that went from EPA to Coast Guard, the state on-scene coordinator, and the responsible party. And then under that, you have your 4 sections. And there's a couple of different places in which wildlife response can fit in. So these are some of the locations in which a biologist, an ecologist, a veterinarian, basically someone who has some experience with the types of critters that might be found in a spill would get called into. So in the situation unit, under the planning section where we're talking about, what's likely to be there, what could potentially be impacted, the environmental unit down there at the bottom, again, the kind of things that are in the area. Up at the top, the natural resource damage assessment, looking at exposure, looking at injury, and trying to discern impacts. And then agency representatives from those state and federal agencies that have some sort of jurisdiction over the wildlife species. And then also we have the wildlife branch. So under operations section, there is a branch stood up that is responsible for recovering and caring for any impacted wildlife, and that's mostly what we're going to be talking about today. So marine mammals have been involved in oil spills for a long time, perhaps most notably in Exxon Valdez. And, it came to NOAA's attention, or in the early 2000s, that this was something that needed more planning and more thought given to how we would prepare. And so Marine Mammal Oil Spill Response Guidelines was developed with the Oil Wildlife Care Network and UC Davis. The draft was completed in 2005, and it was finalized in 2007 for a series of trainings at regional and including at our national meeting with a few drills where we introduced this to marine mammal responders across the country and practice how it would be used in an actual spill. And then in April of 2010, the Deepwater Horizon oil spill happened in the Gulf of Mexico, and there were some pretty significant impacts to that entire ecosystem, and the marine mammals were no exception. So 13 live and 178 dead cetaceans were recovered during the active response phase, with many, many more documented as having been impacted and injured. So this was our test of our guidelines, and we put them into practice and successfully recovered all of those animals. They did give us a lot of lessons learned, though. Having used those guidelines in an actual spill, helped show us all of the different ways in which they could be refined, improved, or maybe made more specific. And then there were a couple of subsequent spills, including the Texas City Y and the Refugio spill that we're talking about today, that gave us some other lessons learned to be incorporated. But we did revise these guidelines and finalize them in December of 2015, and they're available online. If you search for OPR-52, you should be able to pull them up. And so this document provides a structure and a format that we're going to be talking about, because this is how the response was organized and how future responses that for marine mammals that might be impacted would be as well. So this national document gives you an overview with the purpose and use, the sort of rationale for why we wrote this protocol and how it would be used, including some of the legal and structural framework, which is a good reference for folks who are not familiar with marine mammals and how they might be protected under federal statutes. We talk about readiness and the kind of general preparedness things that people can do, organizations can do in order to get ready, structuring the network, personnel, training, and equipment that can be purchased, practiced with, and used ahead of time in order to be ready for when a spill happens. And then when oil has been spilled into the environment, how we would do a response. So the reporting and the activation, how the structure of the branch would be stood up, how marine mammals fit into that structure and the different groups that happen. We talk about data management, how to make sure that the information is collected in a structured and streamlined way. And then our group activities, where we go down into each group and give an overview of it. And this is a tier 3 or a large scale national or international level oil spill organizational chart, as is provided in the guidelines, which gives you how the different groups can be broken up under the ICS in order to have all those, the span of control, and have real roles and responsibilities outlined and well understood by everyone who's participating. In addition to that national overview, we've also worked on developing regional plans and regional annexes. So the plans take the national level generalities in some cases and can make them more specific, particularly for species or taxa that might be more found in a certain region or only found in a certain region. For instance, southern resident killer whales in the Oregon and Washington regional plan, and the regional annexes, which give us some documentation of the capabilities that might be found in a region. If you go to the next slide, they come in different formats, including maps showing you where facilities are located, and tables and descriptions, text descriptions of the kinds of resources that different groups have. And you can see, at a glance, and then with some look, what might be available and what might be ready to bring to an oil spill in a given region, and then reaching out across the broader region to bring more facilities or more organizations in.
So with that background in mind, getting back to the Refugio incident itself, as far as wildlife operations, we did receive notification directly from OSPR on May 19th at about 2:30, 2:45 in the afternoon. The idea at that time was they were unsure whether there was going to be or if there was significant wildlife impacts. So OSPR was to monitor the incident itself and to contact the OWCN if a response was needed. Well, towards that evening, it became very clear the level and the scope of the incident. So the OWCN was activated in a limited capacity to start on May 20th. Some of the initial challenges related to that, however, was because of some of the confusion over the volume of oil early on, we did have limited response capabilities and getting out there. And we are also talking about a community that's very involved and active within their for environmental efforts. In fact, during the Platform A oil spill in 1969, an organization called Get Oil Out, or GOO, was formed to actually respond to that spill. And since that time, there is this history of environmental activism in the region. So we did have a significant amount of self-deployment going on early on, where you had individuals such as these two gentlemen trying to recover an oil bird from the water. We also have this gentleman who captured a live oiled pelican walking down the road trying to find somebody to take it. So we did have significant challenges right from the start from a community who desperately wanted to help in the environment. We also had people out there that were unhappy with the speed of the cleanup and getting buckets donated from their local big box hardware store to be able to clean oil out of the environment. All of these things were happening right from day one of the incident. There are also some other challenges, especially on the wildlife side. This location for us is very difficult for wildlife response. Even though we have a large number of organizations in the region, we don't have any primary care centers in that area. What we have are smaller facilities that can do stabilization, but they are smaller with, at that time, fewer staff and volunteers available. We also had large numbers of marine mammals present in the area, and we had a concurrent unusual mortality event, or large numbers of animals coming in either injured or dead during that time, which means the facilities in the greater region were full already even before this incident. And Sarah's going to get more into that as we move on in the talk. So for the wildlife response itself, we did right from the start decide to divide into bird and mammal groups, each of which reporting to a separate Deputy Wildlife Branch Director. So I was the Deputy Wildlife Branch Director for bird response, and Sarah was the Deputy Branch Director for marine mammals. We also made the decision to institute field stabilization right from the start, both from mobile trailer-based stabilization sites, as well as some of our smaller rehabilitation centers in the area. One of the huge challenges for this incident was transport of animals. Our closest large-scale facility that could accept oiled pinnipeds, seals, sea lions, was SeaWorld San Diego due to the unusual mortality event. And for those of you who know Southern California, the distance between Santa Barbara and San Diego is pretty significant, and there's a large metropolitan area in between it, Los Angeles, that you have to transport through, oftentimes during heavy traffic hours. The closest large-scale bird primary care center we had was based in San Pedro in that greater Los Angeles area. So again, getting animals down to these areas was a distinct challenge right from day one. We also made the decision early on to separate out care from processing within the centers themselves, processing being collection of evidence, collection of that baseline information, a lot of the data, and the care being the actual rehabilitation care. Because right from the start, this was a significant legal and damage assessment incident that needed to have that information closely traveled. So this is the organizational chart that was set up for the incident. This is just a single day. But as you can see, we did separate out the bird groups from the marine mammal groups, all communicating at the incident command post with different deputy branch directors reporting up to our wildlife branch director at OSPR. So here's a map of the response sites itself. So this black blob is Refugio Beach, which is where the spill occurred. We did have stabilization sites immediately adjacent to it and a field stabilization site right on site. But if you see, this is the scale with 20 miles. You could see our closest bird facility was here in Long Beach, and our marine mammal center was down here in San Diego. So we actually had to transport animals long distances to there. And in fact, ended up having a stabilization site established in Long Beach itself where marine mammals could go there overnight if necessary, and then continue on to San Diego in the early morning hours when it was cooler and when traffic decreased, to be able to ease the ability to get them down there. Now on the bird side, we did end up collecting 269 birds during this incident, most of which were dead. We did collect 65 animals. A majority of those were brown pelicans, and 46 animals were released, again, most of those being brown pelicans, but you can see the scope and scale of the actual birds that were collected during the incident.
All right, so over to the marine mammals. As we said, there was already an ongoing unusual mortality event, which means that we had already elevated stranding rates of marine mammals. Added on top of that, spring and especially May is our peak stranding season for many of the species on the California coast. So it just came at the perfect time to make an incredibly challenging response. We had live and dead pinnipeds, California sea lions, harbor seals, and elephant seals all recovered. While there are several species of cetaceans that live right off the Santa Barbara coast there, we didn't have any live strand during this time period. So the only cetaceans that were recovered were already dead at the time of stranding and were primarily common dolphins. And by the numbers, there are 168 total marine mammals collected during the spill, 62 alive. And so in comparison, if you think back to the Deepwater Horizon, where we only had a handful of live dolphins, the 62 is pretty significant. And the Deepwater Horizon and kind of our recent lessons learned, those were all from cetaceans. So we were dealing with pinnipeds, learning as we went, employing some of those best practices, but still, really trying to get a handle on dealing with all of these different strandings. So all of the animals that were collected, all of the live animals, met the definition of stranding, which means that they were in need of medical attention. So that was regardless of the amount of oil or their status of external oiling. So they were recovered from the spill area. They met the definition for stranding, so they would have been stranded. 23 of those pinnipeds survived rehabilitation to be released. So that's a lower rate than you might be expecting. But if you keep in mind that this was during an unusual mortality event, so the animals were already compromised when coming in and then had oiling on top of that kind of underlying poor health, it's actually quite a testament to success that 23 of them were able to be released. So this graph shows the collection dates for the 4 categories of live and dead birds and live and dead marine mammals. So you can see that live animals really picked up in the days and the week following the spill on the 19th of May, and then continued over time. The dead animals really started coming in about a week later. So some of that is likely due to the sublethal and then chronic cumulative effects of being exposed to oil and dying after some period of time. Some of it might also be due to increased effort. So having more people on the beach doing cleanup, more of our wildlife responders out there, looking for animals that were reported and coming in, and they were finding some dead animals as they were going about those other activities. And this map shows that geographic spread of animals that were collected associated with this spill. So the animals started from the west of where the pipeline entered the ocean, but most of the strandings and recoveries were to the east and the southeast. This is where the oil was transported along to, and then also keeping in mind that these are mobile animals, and so some of them may have been swam through the oil and then continued on to strand along the Santa Barbara and Oxnard Ventura beaches. So to look at the long-term impacts, there was a natural resource damage assessment conducted that looked at post-release studies. We had some of these animals that were released received satellite tags. We also tagged some animals that were recovered outside of the spill area to be able to compare them. And that allowed us to track their release for some period of time before those tags fall off. We also identified our protocol and readiness changes, things that we wanted to be able to do in order to be prepared for future spills. And then at the bottom, this is the table of our visibly oiled versus not visibly oiled, which is not to say that they weren't impacted by the oil spill or they didn't have oil in their bodies that just wasn't able to be visualized. So on the injury assessment, we did some surveys, both boat and shore surveys, in order to try and determine what species of marine mammals were in the area that might have been, impacted by the oil, exposed to the oil, and potentially injured. And so this is where some of those additional cetaceans were observed. So coastal bottlenose dolphins, longbeak common dolphins, and gray whales were all observed on these transects, as well as the species of pinnipeds that were recovered as part of the spill. And these were conducted in the days and weeks following the pipeline release. And all of that information is used along with the stranding rates in comparison to historical baseline strandings and other causes of mortality to quantify the injury and come up with the total numbers of marine mammals that were believed to be injured by this spill. And so 232 total marine mammals were injured, including some cetaceans and then the 3 species of pinnipeds. And there are 2 proposed restoration activities projects that are proposed to help restore the injury to those marine mammals. So the first is improving pinniped rehabilitation, particularly in the Santa Barbara area. The goal of this project is to enhance existing stranding network capabilities for some of those partners that we highlighted that are already there, to improve their facilities, their supplies, and perhaps their personnel numbers and volunteers in order to be able to increase the number of animals that they can treat per year to restore those impacted pinnipeds. And then for cetaceans, coming up with restoration projects for cetaceans can be challenging. For this one, we're going to enhance cetacean entanglement response in that area to expand the existing program of responders that are there. This project will provide gear and personnel to be able to respond quicker and to more entangled animals per year to disentangle them, and then also to get that really critical reporting and documentation that can be used to support other management actions that hopefully prevent other cetaceans from getting entangled in the future. And this is a photo of one of those animals that was satellite tagged. seen off Baja, Mexico. You can also see, so in addition to the satellite tag that's glued onto the fur on its back, so it'll stay on for several weeks until the animal molts or until that it falls off. This animal also has that orange flipper tag, which hopefully will stay on for a long time, years at least, and so we could be able to get resights of this animal. And then the very temporary shave marks in the fur on its back that are what the rehab facility easily identify which animal is which when you're looking at the pen. So all three of those things and then allowed us to look at this great photo taken underwater and recognize one of the oil spill sea lions, happy in the wild.
There were also some long-term assessments of impacts due to the birds. Again, this is a marine mammal talk, so we're not going to get into a great deal of this, but a damage assessment was also done for the bird species impacted. We also conducted a post-release survival study in brown pelicans where we put radio telemetry devices, satellite tags on 12 rehabilitation animals and 8 control animals, followed them long-term. What we found in that study was there was some differences in dispersion. Rehabilitated animals tended to fly longer distances. But one of the things is that all of them survived more than 3 months after the incident, as compared to some earlier work by Anderson et al. Looking at the early 1990 rehabilitation efforts in brown pelicans in California. So really positive results. Fortunately, we were not able to follow them to determine reproductive output due to a concurrent El Nino going on that year. And so reproductive efforts for pelicans across the board was decreased. But hopefully in the future, we'll be able to look at that as well. The other thing we also did is adapt and take the information and lessons learned from this incident to change the OWCN protocols to better address some of the things that we found during the incident. So conclusions on this incident itself. As far as the OWCN itself, we had large scale assistance of a number of our member organizations. Of the 33 member organizations that were in the OWCN at that time, we had 21 of them provide either volunteers or staff for the incident. And you could see the sheer scale of the response, both on the bird side as well as the marine mammal side. So we see more than 150 staff and volunteers actively involved in this incident to be able to save animals. We've documented a number of challenges with this, and we've talked about a lot of these during this presentation. Again, mobilizing personnel to the region was very challenging, and supporting the logistical needs to this large-scale response during a very busy travel period. Many of our partners and many of our key wildlife rehabilitation staff were actually out of the region due to the Effects of Oil on Wildlife conference that was occurring at the same time, as well as other necessary travel involvement. So trying to mobilize quickly to the incident site was indeed a challenge right from the start. As we mentioned, transporting 2 primary care centers and stabilization centers in areas with very high traffic volumes really necessitated excellent logistical support and coordination between everybody involved. The need to activate full-scale marine mammal response activities for the first time in the OWCN's history. The OWCN has been mobilized more than 100 times for oil spills in California since 1994. But this is really the first time we've been mobilized for a bird and mammal incident, large scale on both sides at the same time. And that in the face of a marine mammal unusual mortality event, exacerbating the problems associated with the oiling.
So some of our lessons learned from this case study of Refugio. Number one, you can never be too prepared. If you think you're prepared, go out and keep trying. Do more drills, do more practice, go through your protocols again. It will all help. In activation, you really need to be very clear and ensuring that all the responders know about and can follow the standard operating protocols, very clear about who's activated, what activation means, and just trying to make sure there's no confusion on those accounts. Along those lines, communication. There's really no way to have too much communication, it seems. So ensuring that your internal and your external communications are proactive, are followed, and are enough. Logistics and support, trying to get those equipment and supplies identified that are needed, finding caches that you have on hand so that you can immediately deploy, and then also being quick to identify what needs to be reordered, what's going to be running out, and trying to get that in a timely fashion so that it's ready before you need it, before it runs out. So the transportation, as we've said over and over, that was a huge thing for this event. And so really clarifying your needs. What do you need to be able to transport animals? What kinds of vehicles, what drivers' qualifications, how many people and what qualifications to ride along to be able to take care of the animals, to be able to troubleshoot any issues that you might have? How can you identify those personnel and those resources ahead of time so you have them ready to go? And then similarly, along the equipment and facilities, again, there's probably never enough. It is hard, I think, sometimes to decide what to stockpile or how to have it. But when you need it in a spill, it's really good to have on hand, or good to be able to bring in from a bunch of different places and then replenish. And with that, we would really like to thank you for your attention and listening to this case study. And we'd also like to express our sincere appreciation for all of those many personnel, the responders, the animal care staff, the necropsy and sampling teams, and everyone else who came together to make this response possible. So thank you.